Mm. Well, I better hurry up before the parasite gets me. Um, so okay, so these are my initial thoughts on Game B, and I've encountered a lot of critique about Game B, and haven't necessarily encountered praise about Game B, but I'm assuming there's praise for Game B because it's to me it's already in line with the way the culture is thinking. Like it's a very and the reason why I say that is because already I see this within my own generation about to care for the environment and so on. And I don't know. I find Game B to basically be a critique of capitalism. Well, the on the scene of capitalism and its globalization, and then and really what it's done to the environment. So you could say that's Game A. Uh, you could say it. I mean, that's not exactly what it said in the in Game B, but uh, anyways, my so for me, what I got out of Game B was actually the aspect of nature. Um, and the only critique that I have about their idea of nature is the very fact that it isn't actually said explicitly, or isn't said at all, that as Slavoj Zizek says, nature's a bitch. Nature doesn't give two shits about us. The only reason why we care about nature, and this is Zizek's critique, the only reason why we care about nature is because, well, uh, it will eradicate us. Now, the other issue that isn't brought up, well, the other thing that isn't brought up in the sort of uh, the history of the civilization in Game B is exactly how much nature destroyed uh, and gave humanity problems in the beginning, right? Because now it says like, oh, we're causing so much destruction and so on, but nature has been so indifferent to us from since the beginning, uh, and so you could say it doesn't make sense why man responds in such a way that he wants to now control nature, because nature has been such an indifferent piece of shit to man for most of his time being alive. And this is actually Zizek's critique, which I find actually highly relevant, actually, because what isn't said about Game B is that the nature itself is rather indifferent. Um, my speculations about nature is that, well, I don't know. It's a very poetic version of nature. That's what I want to say. It's a very poetic version of nature. Um, idea of wholeness, rejuvenation, um, that we're not separate from nature. Um, but here's like the reversal, right? Here's like the reversal about nature, right? Game A, as the creators claim, that they are indifferent to um, they are indifferent. Hold on. My alarm is going off right now. Okay. So that's the parasite calling me. Okay. All right. So back to nature, right? The idea of indifference is that I'm going to borrow from Zizek. This idea of nature being as wholeness and rejuvenation, and then Game A, the way they present Game A is that, at least in my opinion, is the way they present Game A is that man has become indifferent to nature. Um, their exact terms is exploitive, but in my opinion, it's probably indifferent, meaning you don't really necessarily care about nature, um, which means in a capitalist, in a very capitalist term, you would be exploiting nature. Uh, so that's why I think that the initial actual critique of game A is actually has somewhat aims towards capitalism, rise of technology, globalization. Uh, I feel like it is the fuel in some sense. Uh, competition, so on. Uh, but continuing on, I don't think those are like the, for me, we can talk about those all day or whatever. But I'm mainly concerned with their idea of nature, which is wholeness and rejuvenation. But the thing what I'm trying to say is that nature, in my opinion, was indifferent to mankind from the beginning. The struggle for crops, the seasons. I mean, the seasons itself destroyed people that were nomads. I mean, they struggled to live as nomads. Nature did this to man for as long as we can remember. Nature has been such a bitch and been so indifferent to man for such a long time uh, that it's very interesting that now in the presentation of Game B, you want to convince man to be caring about nature, but actually, man being indifferent to nature is actually the same on the same level that nature has treated man for the past, uh, you know, so many, so many years. So it's interesting that this idea of nature as wholeness and rejuvenation. I mean, if I were to really stick to that principle of wholeness and rejuvenation, then nature wiping out mankind is necessary. Nature should continue to stay indifferent and just wipe out mankind. The funny thing is that human beings want to live and thrive. Nature doesn't give a damn about you. Nature's gonna wipe you off the fucking face of the earth. and if it and if we want to expand nature on a bigger scale, I wouldn't even say that, just destroy the earth, right? The nature would be like, well, just destroy the earth. It's done. Um, the funny thing is that's still in line with the very principle of rejuvenation and wholeness, in my opinion, right? And the reason why that is because, well, the rejuvenation implies decay. Well, because there must be some type of rejuvenation, so decay. Um, who's to say that we're not in a period of decay for rejuvenation? Now, the thing is, to be fair to Game B, is that they're aiming for a specific type of rejuvenation, a specific kind of wholeness. That's what's not, uh, and you can kind of gauge a little bit about exactly their type of wholeness and their type of rejuvenation that they're aiming for. But it isn't super clear. I mean, you get the idea about decentralized technology. You get an idea about, we need to respect each other and so on. Yeah, I mean, so that's mainly my. I don't even want to call it my critique. That's just like mainly my thoughts about Game B. Is that fundamentally their notion of nature is too idealistic for me, in my opinion. Um, just too idealistic. Nature is a bitch, as Zizek said. Nature is a bitch, bro. So the real argument, to some degree, is why should man care? The only reason why man care is going to be a selfish reason, meaning I want to live and survive. I think the idea that we should save the environment is a little bit misplaced, actually. Man wants to save the environment because he wants to freaking live. He wants to thrive. Uh, So that's really my own. That's my. You could say if I were to have a critique, that would be like my initial critique. Is that there's this a little bit idealistic version of wholeness and nature, right? And I believe who was it? Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley writes a very good essay about nature and the darkness of nature. Um, I still think Game B uses a relatively idealistic notion of nature. It's actually a very poetic version of nature, where it's actually mankind is the one that is evil, right? Where there is no allusion to the fact that actually nature can be evil. Nature is um, nature can be evil. You know, nature can be very dark. Nature can be cruel. Nature can be a bitch. So yeah, I've repeated that already a million times. Okay. Now, now you could say what's interesting about Game B, or the very fact is this. I think I was watching a little bit of Dawood's video about, it's like being propaganda. And I agree. I mean, it is very propaganda is. But here's the thing about Game B, and this is probably the charitable point, right? Is that Game B is proposing a new way of thinking. But okay, I did say I'm going to be charitable. Okay, let's be charitable. So yeah, Game B proposes a new way of thinking. Now, if I were to take this from a phenomenological point of view, this already just by watching, just by simply seeing what has arisen with the talks about Game B, the critiques about Game B, is that already it has started a movement. Something is rising. Whatever that rising is going to be, whatever appears after this, is that we're already caught in the initiation of Game B, right? Just the very provocation of the video itself is that we're already caught in the initiation of Game B. The thing is is that there's no guarantee it's going to be the Game B that the video advertises. But the movement itself is already rolling. The reason why I'm saying that is because obviously people are talking about it. People are critiquing it. This is already a movement in thinking towards Game B ? And the allusion to this is what Dawood actually says. What are Game B players? The problem is, I don't think we're ever going to find what Game B players are, is because that we're already becoming initiated into it by the very movement of our thinking towards going away from Game A. Doesn't mean that we necessarily agree with their version of Game B, but it means that we're already being initiated into Game B, but it's not going to be I'm betting it's not going to be the Game B that is advertised. So it actually could. It's a possibility that it could be worse. It could be better. We don't really know. But ironically enough, that is my charitable point. My charitable point about Game B is that it already gets people talking about it. The very fact that something is pointed already initiates us into Game B. The fact that someone is pointing at another way of thinking, whether we agree with it or not, we already initiated as players, right? And the funny thing about playing video games is that as a player, you don't really know anything when you start the game. You just find yourself immersed in it already. You know what I'm saying? You see this with what's that movie? Jumanji. Jumanji, the players are already like in the game, right? They get caught up, and they're in the game. They don't discover what they're supposed to do until they're already in the game. So it's interesting that is the case. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the critiques on Game B probably should be, if there's to be any real critiques on Game B, in my opinion, is to be on their idea of wholeness and their idea of rejuvenation. Because the only reason why I say that again is because it feels like it comes from an idealistic point of view, where basically I can turn those concepts of wholeness and rejuvenation into basically saying, why do we need to exist at all, right? Because if nature is wholeness and rejuvenation, then nature should wipe out mankind, rejuvenate itself, and wipe out mankind. So there's really no, and this plays in the aspect of wholeness, right? To protect wholeness. So uh, there's no necessity for man if you play on this idealistic notion of rejuvenation and wholeness, because then you should just murder man. Nature should just murder man completely. And that's really what I'm critiquing, is that very idea of wholeness and rejuvenation. It's you can turn around those concepts easily and be like, well, then why does man need to exist at all? Man doesn't need to exist then. Nature should just completely destroy him. And that plays into the same concept of rejuvenation and wholeness. So, because as Zizek says, nature's a bitch. I really think I think the critique of nature by Zizek and the critique of nature by Aldous Huxley is something that we should pay attention to. Because to me, again, it's a little bit too poetic for my taste. It's a little too poetic, as if nature doesn't already cause some kind of destruction, harm, or like it hasn't been doing that for years. From the very beginning, when we were nomads. So yeah, I mean that's really it. And again, I don't want to call this my critique, but I'm saying, like, if we are to critique it, I feel like it has to be on these principles, because that is what is advertised, right? That the aim of Game B is that we are on a foundational structure of wholeness and rejuvenation, which then follows that we should care for the environment, we should have destructuralized technology, avoid competition, find our roles, and so on. Again, if Game B is to be critiqued seriously, it has to be on the notions of wholeness and rejuvenation. Of course, we can always critique it on the history of the way man actually grew, or so on. But again, I don't. That's somebody else's realm. My realm as a thinker, in my opinion, is this a little bit concerning idealistic notion of wholeness and rejuvenation. It's not that it necessarily avoids conflict, but it necessarily, I feel like, it kind of negates the idea that wholeness can be evil, and rejuvenation can also, rejuvenation implies decay. So yeah, I think that's it. That's just those are my initial impressions of Game B. But I did praise Game B in the sense that it already is pointing us towards a new way of thinking. And just by everybody talking about it, just by everybody criticizing it, just by everyone praising it, we're already being initiated into Game B. The only thing is there's no promise that the Game B that's presented in the video is going to be the Game B that we're already being slowly initiated in. And just like every other video game, every character that ever jumps into a game doesn't really know what it's playing until after the fact. The only reason why I'm saying that we're already being initiated in Game B is because it's the movement of thinking that has already begun. And again, Game B already exploits this with the movement of Game A, how Game A began with a sort of type of thinking, and then Game A began, right? So you can only explain Game A after the fact. That means we're already in Game B to some degree, or at least the initiation into Game B. That's how I'm looking at it from a phenomenological point of view. That's just how I'm paying attention. It's my opinion. It's okay. You guys can murder me on the hill. That's fine. The parasite will get me, right? Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. I didn't want to rant too long. See, Dawood says, I think you're right. Wholeness and rejuvenation sound good. Yes, that's right. But if you think them through in a non-self-serving way, they might not be as appealing to us. Exactly. That's really exactly what I'm trying to say, is that the implications of wholeness and rejuvenation can be just as well applied without us. And that's, if I were to really critique game B, it would be on this foundation itself, because I feel like that is the foundation of game B. It's like, oh, we need to have this wholeness, this rejuvenation. The danger of this ambiguity is exactly that, that I can argue in the same way, except I could be like, well, then why does the nature doesn't need us? It doesn't. If we actually assert that the nature doesn't need us, and it can still be in the cycle of wholeness and rejuvenation, so it can easily be backfired into that. So it has to be in some ways, it has to be a self-serving act. Let me see. Also, I think that people underestimate the intelligence of game A. Game A can play with the appearance shadows on the cave and presents us with the images of game B, which can be an illusion. Ooh, I like that. No, I like that, because then what happens is it's actually, you know what it reminds me of, dude? It actually reminds me of Player One. And I was thinking about this. Where player game B is when Player One. Hopefully you know what Player One is. Player One is he's immersed in a virtual reality, which becomes his reality in some sense. But um, game A is still around him, right? Even though he's immersed in the virtual reality of game B, right? Let's just say this. But player one always has to return to game A. So we could say, and I like this idea of the Plato's cave, because then it's like, well, the whole point of game B is to help you return to game A in a better way. It's very Humean. I mean, I'm all for it, to be honest. Because you could say on a very abstract level, we're we're in a game. Like, we're in a game. So I do like that. Game B could be an illusion. Yes, I like that. So I think Player One is actually a relevant movie to look at in this case, about how that would play into using Game B as a way to return to Game A, but Game A in a better way. Going to B to return to A. Yeah, I mean, because that's how I look at it. Because what is it? We talked about, I mean, well, not you and I, but I know a lot of people I've talked to, talk about, like, it's not just necessary to go out of the cave, but it's just as necessary to go back into the cave. And so I truly am fond of this idea that we have to go out of the cave in order to go back into the cave, but in a better way. It reminds me of one of my favorite books by Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist. Where it's funny because actually in game B, the player takes a journey. In The Alchemist, the player takes a journey only to then return at the beginning, right? To return back to game A. So I wonder if there is something there about that, that you need to go into somewhere else to discover the richness, or bring back the richness of what game A had began with. I don't know. But it is something I think worth thinking about, and it is. And The Alchemist is one of my favorite books. Actually, it is really one of my favorite books. And it's funny that Game B starts with the journey, and The Alchemist actually starts with the journey as well. And the player actually didn't want to return. The character in the novel didn't want to return, but he eventually did. He said, "You like The Alchemist? This is a serious show." Yeah, I know. You know what's funny about The Alchemist is that a lot of people don't like it, but I like it. I mean, I don't. I definitely, David, you not liking you not liking The Alchemist is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. I definitely don't try to get people to read it. It's just that I read it in deployment, and it just, it hit me. I don't know what it was, but it hit me. So I personally liked it, but this is challenge for friendship. I like it. Uh, Maybe we could drink the next time about it. You can tell me why you don't like it. Uh, okay, but other than that, that was my initial thoughts about Game B, and I actually tried not to listen to too many critiques about Game B because I didn't want it to kind of infiltrate my thinking about what I would really want to say about Game B. And again, the two things that stuck out the most to me was wholeness and rejuvenation, and how those concepts can backfire in a non-self way, like the Vood puts it, um, rather than arguing over some type of like anthropological history, and so on. I think you can critique the philosophy of it itself, um, and you could say I'm basically taking a very Derrida stance, like there's no text outside the book. There's so okay. Your sounds good. All right, sounds good, Dawood. All right, I will catch you guys later. Thank you guys for watching. All right, bye.